Hey guys, welcome back to the You Don't Know Jack podcast. Today we have a couple very special guests, Dean Martin and Chandler Wheat. Dean Martin, owner of Kohr Motorsports and one of the most respected names in Mustang racing and performance development, has a background that spans from working as a vehicle dynamics engineer at Ford SVT to competing at the highest levels of road racing. This includes IMSA, Pirelli World Challenge, and many more. Kohr Motorsports also partnered with Ford Racing and Multimatic on the development of the Mustang GT4 race car, and we're excited to dive into his experience in racing. Chandler, who's joining us from the Roush Performance team, is a senior portfolio manager for our Ford vehicle line and will provide some pretty cool insights into some of those programs.
Well, I'm really excited about this podcast. Thank you guys for being here. Like Josh just said, if you're into Mustangs and racing, road racing, you've heard the name Dean Martin and Kohr Motorsports. I think it's going to be fun to dive into Dean's story, how he got involved in racing, and get some current updates on what's going on in IMSA. So Dean, a lot of people probably don't know this, but you used to work at Roush a long time ago. And we have a long history in road racing together too. Dean was really the big opportunity. I had to go from karting growing up to being able to road race full-size cars. So why don't you walk the audience through a little bit of your history and how you got here?
Yeah, it's funny. A lot of people ask me, how did you get here? And the thing I always say is I feel like I was just walking by the river and I tripped and fell in because I had no intention of ever being here. I grew up, doing construction, and I thought I was going to get into construction management and maybe even be an architect until I found out that architects are more like artists and not engineers. And so I ended up going to school to be a mechanical engineer. And once I graduated from Rensselaer Polytech, I actually came out and got a job here at Roush doing rapid prototyping and design work. And then from here, I got contracted over to Ford and then got hired in direct at Ford and started working at SVT. And I was there for a number of years and then started racing. Actually, back up for a minute, is I decided to volunteer with Larry Rehagen on his, I guess it's still IMSA, 100 years ago, I think it was called Motorola Cup. And so I volunteered to help him out. And my first weekend with them, we got them their first podium. And then the next race, Larry's co-driver couldn't make it. And I had been doing some development work at Ford. And I said, hey, could I drive? What would it take if I wanted to drive? How much does it cost? And, back then it was cheap. It was, $5,000-6,000 a weekend for expenses. And so there we went to Mossport and I got my credential and started driving, and turned out I was pretty good at it. And it just kind of went from there and just did it on and off and as a hobby. And Larry and I were just messing around in 2002, and we built a second car and showed up at Daytona for the last race of the year and won the race by 2 laps with our brand new car, which is one of the reasons the IMSA rules have changed. So we won that race by 2 laps, which is why they now close the pits when the full course caution comes out, because we were benefiting from that, getting a lap, and we put the field laps down because of the rules. So it just it started there and just kind of snowballed into this. Like I said, I never had any intention of doing this. I was pretty happy with my job at Ford, and I kind of just decided one day to take a leave of absence for a year and try racing. And I did that in 2005 and just I've been doing this ever since.
Yeah, another one of the fall in the river kind of moments, right? So growing up, same kind of deal as Dean. I had no intention of ending up in automotive at all. My dad worked for the federal government as an investigator, and I always felt that the FBI or something like that was kind of my calling. Went to school for that, and I had a Mustang, right? My dad was a Corvette guy. Started with Corvettes. Realized that when it was time to buy my own first car that I couldn't afford a Corvette at that point. So my dad was like, why don't you get a Mustang? And for a Corvette guy to be like, go buy that, it was kind of a head scratcher, but looked at it and made a lot of sense. So took the plunge and bought a '07 GT drove that to and from college and fell in with the local Mustang group. That local Mustang group happened to be Lebanon Ford Performance, which is now a pretty well-known name across the dealership space. They were certainly not the first people to put superchargers on lower trim cars, but I think they were the first to really gain national notoriety. So I hopped on that organization early on as a sales guy, just kind of as like a summer job, and we did really, really well with it. You know, we were the number one Roush dealer. We were the number one Whipple dealer. We were the number one Hellion dealer. We were doing special builds. So really just had a wealth of knowledge on the use case for forced induction on Coyote engines. But despite the fact that I was building a lot of really high horsepower straight line cars and, 800 horsepower was really nothing to sneeze at, my personal taste was always road racing, right? Kind of back to that Corvette sports car hook. And started autocrossing my personal car. Didn't take long to get bit by the bug. Started building a street mod class car, and that turned into an X-prepared class car. And then one of my buddies was like, why don't you try a track day, right? That's just what you need. Well, did a track day, got hooked, bought a second car, air conditioning came out, really started diving down that motorsports road. And one of the local guys that was running Spec Iron down where I was, he's like, hey, let's go test my Grand Am vintage race car. Well, from there, I've met Rick Reynolds of Cortex Racing, and he introduced me to pro racing, right? Going and actually doing IMSA. And my first gig was as a assistant tire guy on GT4 Mercedes in IMSA. Oh gosh, probably, 5 years ago. Since then, have done it ever since. It's just once you get it in your blood, it's really hard to shake it. Like I said, it was a pure accident. Have a conversation at dinner, and Dean had been in the paddock, right? I knew Dean through Roush. I knew Dean through Mustang. Back to what Jack was saying, like if you're into the Mustang road racing scene, everybody's heard of Dean Martin, right? But I'd always been on other teams, right? Always worked for other teams, kind of followed Cortex around. And then finally, last year, Dean and I struck up a conversation about what he had planned and decided to make the move over to Kohr as their tire engineer. So by day, I manage the Roush Performance programs. And then by weekend/night, I'm a tire engineer for Dean's GT4 team. And it's been I'd say a match made in heaven ever since, right? Something like that.
He's nodding his head, yes.
Oh, sorry.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So how would you say those two worlds interact for you?
I think on my end, it's kind of that drive and hunger for competition, right? My goal is to take what I learn about motorsports. I'm not a formally trained engineer, but with the support of Dean and with the kinds of conversations that we have about vehicle dynamics and sound engineering principles and how do you make things go fast and what separates a part that's going to fail from a part that is going to survive a race in those super ultra highly competitive practices that is wheel-to-wheel racing. That allows me to take both the drive and the practical application back to Roush and come to our engineers and come to the sales and marketing team and things like that and really push the how do we be competitive, right? How do we, and especially kind of being new in this career of program management, how do we engineer the next generation of product that the folks that are listening to this channel haven't seen yet?
Yep. It's all about that innovation.
Absolutely. And, I think going back to one thing that you said, Dean, you brushed over it very quickly, but, you hopped in the car and you were instantly, showed some speed. The way I interpret that is you were able to do that because of your engineering knowledge, talent for driving, but those two combined together are really powerful because you really have a deep understanding of what's going on in the car. And not only does that help you drive, but also helps you engineer the car to be faster.
Yeah. And that's one of the things that, I kind of say that's what separates an entry-level pro guy to a paid pro. One of the benefits that I brought is, yes, I could drive the car fast, but to be able to feel what the car is doing and, articulate that to an engineer is extremely valuable as a race car driver. Unfortunately, I was the race car driver, the engineer, the chassis guy, the team manager, so you're trying to do all this stuff while driving the car, but the but that's the thing that I think, made me, I'll say, as successful as I was that I could drive the car fast, but I could also make the car faster by tuning. But yeah, understanding how the car works and how the chassis is going to react is extremely critical. Realistically, as long as you, from a driver standpoint, as long as you can articulate what the car is doing, it's great to have an engineer on the other side of the radio who understands what knobs to turn to make the car a little bit better. And that's one of the things that I enjoy most about the racing is interacting with the drivers and just getting feedback and saying, okay, let's make this adjustment. What do you think? And I'll say one of the hardest things to do, especially when you're the driver who says this is the change we should make, is when the car just isn't better when you make the change. Like everybody thinks, oh, we're going to make this change, it's going to be better. And sometimes you just go the wrong direction. You've got to be honest with yourself and go, nope, that was wrong. Let's go the other way. Let's try something different. So that's one of the things that I really enjoy most about the racing.
Very cool. Yeah. And it's, and Chandler, you too, and having that same passion for performance and, car setup, whether it's on the street or on the racetrack, I think that's something I think we all really relate to here. It's part of our culture too. It's why we, as Roush, are an engineering company that offers something different. Yeah, it's a little hard to explain, when you think of, not to put down, the standard engineer, but I've known a lot of engineers who are not necessarily into cars or performance racing. And then you get the racing, passionate automotive, performance people, whole different world, whole different approach. It's a difference between, simply solving problems to adding that competitive edge that really pushes you much further.
I think something kind of relating on what both of you guys have said is knowing what knobs to turn, right? And being able to discern, are you engineering to solve a problem? Or are you simply engineering a product, right? In the street car world, where a lot of that relates to is lower and stiffer is automatically better, right? And I seen Dean smiling and chuckling, but that's one of those advantages that I think is kind of uniquely, or maybe not uniquely, but very much Roush is, we don't just engineer a product to solve a problem that was never there, right? The vehicle's looked at holistically between the 5-axis shaker rigs and driver feedback, like Dean, putting drivers behind the wheels, really measuring and figuring out what's going on versus slam the car on the ground, put a massive sway bar on it, and then suddenly wonder why the car skids across the ground and doesn't grip up. So, yeah,
I actually got a kind of a funny story about that, and I don't know if I should really talk about it, but I will.
Those are the best stories.
So, a guy by the name of Dave Royce, been a friend of mine for a long time, is actually working with me currently as a consultant. Used to work at Rancho and at IBOC, and is a pretty good engineer himself, even though he's not a trained engineer. He told me a story about how he was at IBOC and they put suspension kit on a car, and they wanted to take it to a shootout and compare it to the factory car compared to theirs. And he said, no, we're not going to do that. And, his management was like, well, why not? He said, because our car isn't going to beat that car, and they're confused. They're like, what do you mean? We've just developed this great suspension, and, we've developed this great suspension in 3 months to work on this car. And, and Dave said, no, but they worked for 3 years developing this suspension. It's all matched. And it was a performance car, right? So it wasn't like, we took a Honda Civic and stiffened it up and made it better. It was a, high level performance car. And, so it goes back to, what Chandler said, why I was laughing and smiling as I was thinking about that. Everybody thinks lower and stiffer is better, and it's not always the case, so
start messing with, you start messing with control arm geometry, things like that. I don't know if I'm allowed to share this secret, Dean, but at least on the race cars, we frequently run very, very little sway bar, at least on the Mustangs, and that's more or less been true from the S197 days, all the way up until now is teeny tiny rear bars or rear bar completely disconnected. You have to let the weight of the car roll into the tire to, create the maximum amount of grip that you can out of the tire. So it's not to say that there's not good performance parts that are out there, but what it is to say is that simply slamming your car on the ground and stiffening it up, while it may feel better objectively, right? And I think that's a really good thing to maybe talk about after this, is the difference between seat of the pants and, measurable objective, data. Everybody loves to install parts and it's like, oh, it was great. Oh, it felt so much faster. Oh, my car's so much stiffer, which automatically means it's so much better. And while you may feel a difference from a data standpoint, what you did may have actually objectively made the car worse. So,
yeah, I always think about that when I read the tire evaluations on that very popular tire sales website.
Yeah.
Yep.
And it's just that mentality, like everybody thinks, oh, I made a great decision buying these new tires. Well, you just came off of a set of tires that you probably put 40,000 miles on, and that was your last frame of reference. So now you just put new tires on, and the car is so much quieter, it handles better, it's so much, it rides better. Well, yeah, it's going to. You just put brand new stuff on, and so you're not doing an actual A to B, right? And that was one of the things that I loved about when I was at Ford doing tire testing. I mean, we would have 6 sets of tires, and it would be construction A, B, C, D, E, F, whatever, and they were all black, round, same tread, and just the construction was a little different, and you could definitely tell the difference when you got in the car and started driving it around from a performance standpoint, ride quality, noise. It's amazing what you can do with a tire. And I always kind of think back to those times when people start talking about, how tires are so much better. And it's like, it's just, there's so much going on in a tire. It's crazy.
Yeah.
And actually the same thing with, vehicle dynamics as well. I think obviously, we're all very familiar with it, but, for those who haven't really tuned to suspension, it's extremely difficult. You have all these different variables and no set of instructions to tell you which way to go with it. And you have to figure it out.
Yeah. Yeah. And a lot of it's subjective, right? You gotta number one, from a Roush standpoint, right? What does your customer want, right? This was something that we always toiled with when I was at SVT. It's like, okay, what are the metrics? Like, what do we want to be? What do we want this car to feel like? And it was very subjective. And then you'd have management drive it and say, no, it's too soft or it's too stiff, whatever. And then, we would drive it and like, no, we got to do this. And like, there's that back and forth to try to figure out exactly where do we want to be. And it's just, it's a complete system, right? It's not just springs. It's not just bars. It's bushings. It's tires. It's ride heights. It's everything. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of people don't really understand that actually. And I'll say it's one of my best kept secrets. And this goes to anybody who thinks, oh, I'm just going to lower my car and make it better. And when people come to me and say, oh yeah, I lowered my car and it's doing this and, it's starting to wander. And the first question I ask is, have you neutralized the suspension? And I get the blank stare because so many people just don't understand what that means. Even guys that I know that have been doing chassis work for a long time don't understand what that means. And what it means is to neutralize all the bushings. You've got a lot of rubber bushings in your suspension. So if you don't take those control arms loose and you put your lowering springs in and you basically change your ride height and you put preload into those bushings. So it makes the car very choppy and rough and does weird things to your alignment as well. And most people don't understand it. And I think it's one of the most critical things when you're lowering a car or doing a setup on a car. Once you've got your ride heights where you want, you've got to go back and neutralize your suspension so that the car actually rides how you want it to.
I think on that note, another two other fun points, Dean, are one, sway bar end links, right? Same deal, neutralizing the sway bar. And I think that even bigger than that is the misconception that coilovers are actually for just adjustable lowering, right? The premise in the aftermarket is you buy a coilover so you can dial in your ride height based on the look that you want, whereas in the motorsports world, we're using that to adjust the crossweight. We're using that to adjust the corner balance of the car, the handling dynamics of the car, the which way the car pulls based on the orientation of the track, et cetera. Whereas you look at how people on the street perceive it, and it's purely about, can I get my wheel gap, tightened up?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, at that point, just put it on John's bumpers and send it.
We are on Michigan roads. I mean, it's basically the same thing, right?
Yeah. So, Dean, obviously, you're still in racing. Are you driving right now?
I'm trying not to, but I drove at Daytona. Did I drive this year?
Yeah.
I can't.
Yeah, you were in the car. I think you broke the car, didn't you?
No,
that was last year.
That was last year. Oh yeah, it was last year. Yeah, and for some reason, when I got in the car, I told the guys keep me posted on how my times are, and my name ended up at the top of the chart, and I got mad. Like, you're supposed to tell me that I'm going too fast. But I love Daytona. It's one of my favorite tracks.
So what's going on with your race team this year?
So we've got two cars. I was only going to do one car, but then I got a phone call from my good friend Ray Mason, and Ray said he wanted to go racing in IMSA, and he had a new kid that was really quick that he'd been working with his TA2 car named Evan Slater, and I knew Evan just from being in the Trans Am paddock and hearing his name, and I knew he was a front running guy, and so we started talking about it and started talking about budget and what they wanted to get out of the year, and he's like, yeah, I want to do it, I want to go for it. And I said, okay, well, let's do it. So we added the second car. So we've been running two cars with Bob McCallion and Billy Johnson that we've been running for a number of years now, and then so we added Ray and Evan to the fold, and it's been fun. I know you've been around Ray. He's such a great guy to be around and race with. A lot of fun. And Evan's actually very impressive. We talked a little bit about driver feedback and being able to articulate what the car's doing to an engineer. And I think that's one of the things that Evan excels in. Especially at 19 years old. Yeah.
So Ray was around and already racing when I first showed up on the team back in 2006.
Yep.
Yeah, he's been around a long time. It's great to see him out there.
Yeah, he's on the 4th of July this year. He will be 80 years old.
Wow, good for him.
That's impressive.
It is.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah. So we're having fun. We've had some struggles this year for different reasons. It's a total package. So, but we're getting things more on track. Like we've had a little bit of new car teething pains. We bought 2 brand new cars for this year. So we've had just a few small issues, ironing those out. But so far we're doing okay, and it's going to get better. It's been getting better every race. So my expectation is that it'll just keep getting better.
Awesome.
I think, Dean, maybe a good topic to kind of cue the listeners in on is the production that is motorsports, right? And it having come from watching it on TV and then attending it as a spectator, and then now in the paddock working with the team, as a tire engineer, the level of attention to detail and the production that is racing is sorely underestimated, right? From trying to sync up the arrival of 15 people to the same place in the country, coming from all over the place, the logistics, getting the rigs there in one piece, getting the rigs there with all the right parts on them, getting the cars wrapped and completed, and then the race weekend, right? The chaos of making changes, the chaos of breakage, right? And I mean, what the listeners don't understand and appreciate, short of actually doing it for a number of years, is you can have your whole weekend ruined by a lug nut that's been rounded off. You're spending lots of money the level of effort is absolutely massive, and the silliest little things can, take you from hero to zero in the blink of an eye. So somehow you've managed to do this, I'd say arguably longer than most in the paddock, and I'm sure that you've seen it all, but I'm interested on how you've managed to deal with it and how you've learned to optimize it over time.
It's a difficult question because it's I don't know, a sickness. I think, it's just a drive to, just not fail, and so every time, something doesn't get done or somebody forgets something or, they're not available, I've had to step up and get it done. But yeah, I don't think anybody really understands how much work it really is, booking all the flights, booking all the hotels, figuring out who's going to have what meal and where we're going to eat, and making sure the cars are prepped and ready, livery design, we've outsourced some of that, but a lot of it, I still do have a lot of input. And wrapping cars when we can't get the car, when we can't get the wrap guys in, I got to change my hat to wrap guy.
He's a professional rapper on the weekends. Yeah. I've seen the gold chain.
But yeah, it's so much that I could sit here and start talking about it, and it's silly things. It's like you've got to go through all the toolboxes and make sure all the tools are there. Did somebody lose a socket or a wrench? Because usually if they've lost a socket or a wrench, it's one that you really need, so it's just down to, do we have enough rags and brake clean and such, and, ultimately I find myself checking every single thing. And so, yeah, it's a lot of work, and it's stuff, something that I don't think anybody really understands. And you can't even appreciate it until you actually, like you've done, get into it and see what it's like. I've had people come on and, after one weekend, they're like, I can't do this. And I'm like, yeah, imagine if you had to do all this pre-work and then all the stuff that we've got to do when we get back. It's a lot of work, and and a lot of people just don't realize how much work it really is.
Yeah, I think that's part of the fun. I'm a cog in the machine, right, in the operation, and it's cool to take the Roush frame of reference as a program manager and watch racing, right, as a program unfold over the weekend. How do you deal with the twists and turns? How do you manage the personalities? How do you manage the mechanical failures? How do you source the part that somehow didn't make it on the truck that needs to end up on the car in an hour to make qualifying? Watching all of it and sitting back and observing is really fun, but it also, in my opinion, that's back to that practical, lesson learning that I can bring back to Roush as we run a program. How do we deal with the twists and turns? How do we deal with a change of request from the sales team, right? How do we respond to a competitor, right? How do we deal with a supplier shortage to make sure that our line is running and our dealers are fed? So it's nice to just be the cog on the racing side, but I feel like, it's all about the song and the dance of what is racing and how does that relate back to, what we do here every day, in the walls of Michigan. So,
yeah, it's like you can have the best laid plans and, you can have your path walking forward. Ultimately, something is going to derail it, and you've got to react. And in racing, you got to react now, because your deadline is 20 minutes or 2 hours from now, not, you can't kick the can down the road. And so it's just, that's one of the exciting things about racing is you've got to get it done. And, there's very little margin for error, right? When something goes wrong, you've got one opportunity to fix it and get it right, because that car is probably not going to come back until the end of the race.
And it's also,
at least you hope,
very unforgiving too if you get it wrong.
Yes.
Yeah, the adaptability is huge, right? The level of flexibility that you have to have. I think the old saying is no plan survives first contact with the enemy. And that's especially true in the racing environment when you do have contact and the car comes back with something hanging off of it. And the question is, how quickly can I assess, do I tape this back on? Do I cut it off? Is it to the point where the car can't run anymore and we have to sideline the car? How do we react to damage? How do we react to changing weather, right? As a tire guy, changing weather drives me nuts. And we can go into that later on if we want, but things that small strategy, changes that you're making on the box, it's all about adaptability. So,
yeah, like I said, you go in with a war plan, and then you've got to change. You've got to change battle plans as you go along, because it's just an ever evolving thing, from a strategy standpoint as the race is unfolding.
Absolutely. I remember early on when I first started with the team, I had just raced go-karts, like I mentioned. Then I had the chance to race with you.
Are we going to VIR right now?
Yeah, going back to VIR. And I was in way over my head. The dynamics of driving a car, there's so much more to it. And it's, not to say there isn't a lot to go-karting, because there is, but very different world. And hopped, into the seat against some of the best in the world. And I was trying to figure everything out, study data, think everything through, including, how is the race going to start, and, where do I need to be? That never works. You can't predict it. You can maybe have a few ideas, but if you get stuck on it, it actually just slows down your reaction to what's going on around you.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's kind of interesting that way.
Yeah. It's funny because I remember part of that race very well, of the end of the race, and to put this in context, this is Jack's first pro race, and it was I believe 6-hour race.
It was
at VIR. We ran into the night, into the darkness. Nobody was prepared for it. And then it started raining. And Jack's in the car. And Jack didn't want to be in the car anymore. And he's on the radio, and I'm on the radio, and we're like sitting there, and I'm looking at his lap times and everybody's lap times around him. And I'm like, all right, Jack, I know you're uncomfortable. I said, you can slow down about a half second a lap. Because by this point, like the field had spread out, and he was probably 5-6 seconds behind the guy in front of him, and probably 8 to 10 seconds ahead of the guy behind him. And if I remember correctly, we were running 7th or 8th. We were in a really good spot. His pace was good, but he was not comfortable. And I just said, just do what you can. You're doing, just focus and stay on track. We're gonna, you've got, I think it was probably 30 minutes to go. I'm like, just tough it out for another, 30 minutes, and we're gonna have a good finish, and we did. So I'll never forget that interaction that you and I had, because I could tell, like, and I knew how bad it was out there, because there were cars going off left and right, and
that's after, I think, the night before I crashed in practice, because I didn't know the track, and I couldn't see very well. And at VIR, for anyone who hasn't been on the grass when it's wet, I mean, it is ice. I think your car actually accelerates on that stuff.
Yeah. I was going to leave that part out.
Yeah. I think I slid for about 10 seconds before I found a tire wall.
Yeah. The lower S's got up on the painted curb, and that was it.
Yep.
Oh man.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've learned actually to like the rain later in my racing career, not for any healthy reason, but just knowing that everyone else feels uncomfortable, and if they feel uncomfortable, that makes me happy.
Yeah. Yeah. I used to like the rain, not so much anymore.
All right. So Dean, Kohr Motorsports has been involved in everything from club racing to IMSA. And I'm curious, what were some of the biggest turning points in the team over the years?
I'll say the most pivotal, and this is going back, was when Larry and I were kind of just doing this as a hobby. Sorry, when Larry Rehagen and I were doing this as a hobby, when we were running under Rehagen Racing. We got a phone call from Jesse Cox, who was one of our mechanics on the team. Things had gotten slow at his work, and he said, "Hey, do you think you guys could employ me full time?" And at the time, we didn't know. We were like, "Yeah, let's try this," And so, because this was just after we had started renting cars, so we're like, "Well, we're going to need to prep the cars, so let's have Jesse work on the cars full time, and then we'll just go to the track." And it worked out. That was probably probably the tipping point for what drove us in this direction was having somebody as talented as Jesse working on our cars and preparing them, because, you know, I say a lot, more races are won back in the shop than they are on the racetrack.
And just to back that up, Jesse is absolutely a brilliant mechanic.
Yeah, absolutely.
And to add, he also is also a Roush employee. So he works over.
You're welcome.
Yeah. Hey, yeah. So he works over on the wrenching on the vehicle for the vehicle development stuff that we do with the OEMs. So it's funny how he backed Dean to the conversation earlier of vehicle dynamics and being able to correlate what the development driver says and turn that into changes on the vehicle. Jesse's just an incredibly talented wrench when it comes to prepping those cars, and he took what he learned from you. I mean, he still does it, right? He's still on the team today, you know, but he also works inside of the Roush org on the OE development side.
Yeah. I'll say that's probably the biggest, you know, tipping point for how we got here, how I got tripped into the river. and it just started going well. And like I said, things got better and better. And in 2005, I decided to take a leave of absence and try it full time. So it was, you know, at that point it was Jesse and I in the shop, you know, full time. And it just started to progress and kind of turned into what it's become. You know, so I think a lot of that's, you know, like I say this a lot. I even just the other day I was talking to Larry while I was here in town. I said, I still think back to the, you know, when it was just me, you, and Jesse, and all the things that we managed to accomplish. And, you know, I feel good about the things that we did with just the three of us. And so, yeah, so that was probably the biggest, you know, kick down to where we're going. And then it's just it's been up and down ever since. You know, it's racing, right? You have your good years and then you have your bad. You know, and you know, one of the worst years I had was when Jack and company were racing with us and then left to do their own thing. And you know, I was just, well, what am I going to do now? Because I had kind of changed to the direction of the team to only focus on that program, and then that program went away, and so we had to figure it out. So we just pooled some money, and Kenny Wilden and I decided to drive, and that was 2009, right? Yeah. And like we showed up at Daytona with two cars, and just I think it was me, Kenny, Larry, and Jesse, and just went out and you know, we're like, well, if we show some speed, maybe, you know, we can get some customers, and ended up getting a customer to help fund the deal, and ended up winning the championship in 2009. So, you know, talk about the highs and lows. I mean, like probably the lowest of lows to start the season to the highest of highs at the end. And
you guys were very dominant that season. I think you won like every other race pretty much.
It was, I think to date, it was still the best average position of any GS car. We averaged, I think, 4.6 was our average finishing position. When I think our worst finish was 8th, and that was at VIR because I told Kenny not to crash the car because we had to win the championship.
That's fair. So,
but yeah, that was a good season. It was very much a character building season. And then, you know, kind of a similar story, and I kind of really don't want to talk about it, but it happened, so I will. We're at the end of 2019, went to Ford looking for some support, and we were told that there wasn't any support, financial support, sorry, and which was fine. We were still kind of going, and 2 weeks later, they announced driver development program for a female driver, and my customer got pretty upset because it was very close to a topic that we had been trying to make work, and just it didn't happen, and he got very upset and just said, you know, give me one reason why we shouldn't just go buy an Aston Martin. And you know, and I just said, whatever you want to do. I'm pretty unhappy about the situation myself. And so we got an Aston Martin. Well, we called Aston Martin. One of the guys on the team called Aston Martin to see if there was a car available, because I didn't want my name associated with trying to find a car in case this didn't work out, And so one of the guys called and they're like, yeah, no, we won't have a car until March. And I said, well, all right, well, I guess maybe we better tell them who it's for. So I had him call back. I said, just tell them it's for us and that we want to run it in IMSA next year. And this is our driver lineup, blah, blah, blah. 20 minutes later, I get the call back. Aston said Aston Martin said they'll have a car in Orlando in 6 days. So
that's the Dean Martin effect right there.
Well, not so. We'd had a lot of success, right? And we weren't just some new kid on the block looking for an Aston Martin, right? Mm-hmm. Like, we had a good reputation in the series, and it helped, right? But I'll never forget. Like, we got that car a week before the Saturday before we were going to the Roar, and we rented Homestead, ran the car, took it to the shop in Daytona. Actually, took it to my friend's shop in Daytona because I hadn't moved yet, and worked out of his tile shop, and got the car prepped and ready, and took it to Daytona, and we had a very successful season. So again, the lows to the highs, and then then just back. So it's just been it's just up and down every year.
Yeah, for sure. That's racing, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's every race.
Yeah.
And that's the other thing too, is you're leading 1 second, and then you have a mechanical breakage, you're out, right? You're leading 1 second, you have a good gap, and you've got somebody behind you closing. Lap after lap, you're watching the time tick down. You're watching the gap close. Dean, I think we had this at Indy.
You mean when we called a perfect race, ran a perfect race, and then a car that completely blew turn one had to come back, and then also got a penalty, somehow ended up winning the race?
Yeah, that one.
The one that was like 1.2 seconds a lap faster than the lead car that was...
we never said the BOP was perfect. We never said the BOP.
We never said that word either.
Oh yeah, no. But yeah, that was.
It's frustrating.
I remember that was my wife's first time going to an IMSA race. First time, we're leading, right? We're leading comfortably, and to watch her experience the same thing that we experience every weekend, where it's just the nail biter, and you see the car coming, and you see him coming, and you see him coming, and you're watching, You're watching your guy drive the tires off of it, doing everything he can to stay ahead. And that, I think the worst part for me was when the camera crew came down at the end of the race to catch our celebration, and you were on the last lap, and the other competitor got on the inside and drove around, and to watch the camera crew pick their stuff up and walk down to the other box. It's like that just sinking feeling. We still ended up on the podium, but man, it hurt.
Yeah. Yeah. That's, and that's when I say, you can have a perfect race, and sometimes, the way the rules are, you're not going to win that one.
Yeah, you're just there.
So, but I say the pendulum swings both ways. And I mean, pretty sure there's a lot of guys that would be sitting in other cars talking about us at Road America last year, right? I mean, the Mustang was a huge overdog.
Yeah.
And everybody knew it. And we're like, okay, this is our race. I guess they're going to give us this one. And,
it was.
And I still question the decision that was made, but it was made, and it cost us a race.
Yeah.
So
I don't know if you've ever had this experience, but, I think one cool part of our partnership, I'd like to talk about too, is like you mentioned, about 2009, I went off in a different direction in racing for 5 years, and a little bit with my own team. And for part of a year, I was driving with someone else. I'm not even going to say who it was, but had a really hard time with, finding speed in the car. It was one of those moments where you really wonder, what am I doing? Is it me? Am I not driving correctly or what? And you invited me. I think you believed more in me at that time than I did. You invited me back onto the team to do World Challenge. And that run was some of the best years of racing I've had ever. we got back-to-back wins at St. Pete.
Yep.
Just, it was night and day difference. You know, I want to give you credit. You know, you really know what you're doing in racing and tuning cars.
Appreciate it.
And that was pretty fun also when we got to team up again.
Yeah.
In IMSA with the GT4.
Yeah. In 2017, we won a lot. We either, again, teething problems, right? We either were winning or on the podium or parked on the side of the track, right? With silly little gremlins or issues. But yeah, that was a great year. It was a good car. Yeah. I always think back to Watkins Glen and we just had a great year. Well, and also Road America, when you dominated the whole first half of the race. It was I think it was dry into wet, back into dry, and then back. Well, you got out as it started raining again. We did the driver change, and I inherited the lead that you had gotten us, and then they called the race after a lap, and everybody was congratulating me, and I'm like, why are you congratulating me? Did you just see what Jack did? Right. And you just drove around everybody in the wet, So it was probably my two highlights from that year were Road America and Watkins Glen. So Watkins Glen more because I put the trophy halfway through my hand on the podium.
Oh yeah, I remember that.
I'm holding the trophy up and there's blood's just pouring down my arm.
Well, that was an exciting finish.
It was.
You passed.
Yeah.
You passed on the last lap, wasn't it?
Yeah. Rusty, I think it was in Aston Martin maybe. And I had played peekaboo with him going down into turn one. And I got him distracted enough. He completely missed the apex and I started driving under him and I got right underneath him as we hit the apex to 2. And he put me up on the curb and we just made enough contact that it spun him. And I was like, oh no. I was like, I hope he doesn't get hurt. And I managed to just spin and not hit anything and then go. And we ended up winning. But yeah, he did punch me after that, by the way.
Did he? I don't think I caught that one.
Yeah. He came, he was walking over and I'm like, man, I apologize. I'm sure if you watch the video, you'll see, that I was well inside when you turned down and he's like, yeah, I've seen the video. And just still punched me anyways.
Well, he must not be too hard of a puncher.
Well, it was just a chest punch, like a message.
Yeah.
So, which I was okay with.
Right. So I got to ask, what's coming up or we're getting ready to go to Mid-Ohio and we're actually going to go do the NASA weekend 2 weeks before the IMSA weekend just to get a little bit more track time, and we're gonna get last year's car out, and we're gonna try to A to B the new car to the old car because there's some grumblings that the old car was better. So we're gonna see which car the guys like better, and maybe run that for Mid-Ohio IMSA race, and then we're up north for a little while. So I'm actually looking for a small space to park the rig and work on the cars in between races up north here so that we can cut down on the fuel costs, because I'm not sure if you guys have seen the price of diesel lately. Mm-hmm. We're going to see if we can stay up here a bit and save a little bit of money, and
I think we can work something out.
Yeah.
I heard rumors that you guys might be fielding V6 Mustang.
Yeah. I heard that too, but not in IMSA. We're gonna do some WRL, maybe some AER, a Champ car, some back when it was fun. We're gonna go have some fun with that V6 car.
Sounds good. So, where can people find you on social media?
Well, me personally, I've just got I've got Instagram, but my Facebook mostly, and I probably should have been more prepared for this. We've got our Instagram is Kohr Motorsports. Instagram and Facebook are just Kohr Motorsports.
With a K.
Yeah, Kohr.
Kohr, yeah. I keep forgetting because it just comes so naturally to me. So Instagram, Kohr Motorsports with a K, Kohr, and also Facebook is Kohr Motorsports.
Awesome. And I heard you guys might be looking for some people.
Yeah, always looking for talented guys, looking for full-time mechanics in the shop. Really looking for some guys with some experience and passion, but also, our fly-in guys, always looking for good talent. So if there's anybody out there that's got a lot of experience and is looking for a good place, a good home, we're looking for people. And you can actually reach out. We've got an email address at careers@kohrmotorsports.com. And again, KOHR motorsports.com. And you can shoot a resume to that email address. And we've got somebody looking at those all the time.
Cool. All right. I'm going to end it with this last question. Most memorable win for you?
Ooh, well, Jack just put the memory in my head. So, because that is the Watkins Glen one is one for a bunch of reasons. God, it's pretty bad when you're like, yeah, I've had quite a few, and but that one, for me, that one was pretty good, and just thinking back to Jack's win at St. Pete, I kind of felt like that was an accomplishment for me as well. It's part of the reason when people ask me, do you miss driving? I don't miss it as much when the team does really well, because I get a lot of satisfaction when the team performs. So I look at those a lot as well, but most memorable, I'd have to say Watkins Glen, because it was a battle all the way through the stint. I had a great win at Toronto, a lot of great wins at Belle Isle, so that's why Belle Isle will always be near and dear to my heart. And St. Pete, I had a lot of wins there too, but the Watkins Glen one really stands out. But also Jack's drive at St. Pete was pretty epic as well.
Awesome.
So I'm going to take a little bit of credit for that one too.
Oh, absolutely.
There you go. All right. Well, Dean, Chandler, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
It was a blast. If you guys heard it from Dean, if you want to check out Kohr Motorsports, make sure to give him a follow on social. And if you're interested in getting into the track side stuff, make sure to reach out to them about open spots. Until then, we'll see you for the next episode. Thank you.